But as we've worked through Confessions, we've got St. Augustine's autobiography, and really he has 3 conversions in his life. All right, his first conversion was his conversion to philosophy, all right, where he wanted to find a greater meaning in life. What book did he read to kind of draw him that way?
The Hortensius.
Good, Cicero's Hortensius. And in reading that, he thought, all right, living this humdrum world is just not working for me. There's got to be more to it. So he converts to this philosophic life. And he removes himself from society a little bit to have these deep, higher thoughts. And obviously it doesn't give him any fulfillment. So then he seeks his second conversion, which is to... What religious belief did he follow for a while?
Manichaeism.
Yeah, the Manichaeistic faith. And so he is deep in it, and it's a form of Gnosticism where there's this duality, this battle between good and evil, light and darkness, physical versus, ethereal, spiritual. And so he is in that for a while, and what pulls him out of, the Manichaeistic faith?
Was it Faustus?
Faustus, okay? So he
Faustus.
has had all of these questions, and people haven't been able to answer his questions. They kept saying, Faustus will know. When you meet Faustus, Faustus will answer your questions. So he gives up pretty much a decade of his life following this faith, waiting for his Yoda to come in and answer all of his deep questions. And Faustus' response is,
Nothing.
I don't know the answer to that question. That's a good question. I wonder who could answer it. And so he's totally deflated, and he is completely discouraged. He doesn't know what he's going to do because he's now converted twice. I mean, we don't necessarily look at believing in a false faith as a conversion, but for him it was. All right, he changed his way of thinking and his lifestyle to follow this other faith, and it totally came up void in the end for him. So he doesn't know what he's going to do, and he decides that he wants to listen to the bishop, probably one of the most significant people in his life. Seth. The Bishop Ambrose, who originally he just wanted to hear him speak because he appreciated his skills as an orator. He could, had no desire to learn anything from him spiritually. It was just that he wanted to, hear a good listener and respect, the art of the trade. And as he was listening to Ambrose preach, he really started to appreciate the message of salvation and the message of Christ, and found some meaning to it. And that was where we wrapped up last week. Question number 5. How did God bring Augustine to realize how utterly wretched he was?
This drunk beggar that he was passing on the street was happier than he was.
Yes. All right, that's pretty rebuking, where somebody who's a hot mess is happier in life than somebody who should be happy. And I think that is a shame that we see in a lot of Christians that just don't have peace and grumble and complain about a lot of things. And it's hard. Like, where is your joy? Where's the joy of the Lord in those kind of people? And then you look at somebody who doesn't have the Lord, and he seems to be happier in life. And that was really rebuking for him, and truthfully should be rebuking for most of us. Are we happier than people who don't know the Lord? And if we aren't, well, I should say joyful. Happy is kind of an emotion. Joy is a root in your life. But do we have more joy in our life? When awful things happen, do we grumble and complain about the Lord? Or do we say, all right, God, you give and take away. Blessed be your name. And there are people, I knew a family that unfortunately had 2 children die at 2 different times. And one was a medical condition, and one of them was the child got forgotten in a car, and it was hot, and they suffocated. And it was horrible and excruciating. I mean, I cannot imagine what they felt. But they are some of the most gracious people in the world. Their faith is so real, and they make comments like, the Lord blessed us to have them for X amount of years on earth, and who are we to say that God can't have them back? I mean, it is rebuking, because I don't know that I could say that. I don't. But that's somebody who knows the joy of the Lord, and they are happy people, and they just are able to realize that what we deserve on the incarnation, we deserve death. Everything else we get is just a blessing. And so I think that's what he had to kind of wrestle with. and realized, shame on me for being so, I gotta figure it all out, and what am I gonna do, and life doesn't make sense. And here this carefree drunk is the happiest in the world. And so it's kind of ironic how sometimes God uses those most unlikely circumstances or characters to teach us a valuable lesson. Okay, question number 7. How did God prepare Alypius for his work as a preacher and a church ruler? Again, one of those ironic things that the Lord did to use him. What was it? What happened to him?
He was arrested.
He was arrested, and did he commit the crime?
No.
No, all right? And so it kind of gave him this idea of what it's like to be on the other side and to be humbled by it. And did you have more than that, or you just had that he was arrested?
I had that he was arrested and then later freed. But
Okay, later freed. That's what he was accused of.
Well, he was falsely accused, and it kind of taught him, since he was to be a Christian judge later, it kind of taught him not to too hastily accuse people. Kind of be innocent until proven guilty.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and can you imagine the idea, connecting that with Christ, of he possibly was going to face the consequence of a sin he didn't commit. And that's exactly what Christ did on the cross. He paid the penalty for a sin he did not commit. And then also the whole idea of getting, we talk about in salvation, like we were captives and now we're free. All right, he gets that idea of being, contained in jail to being free. So they really are some practical life examples that he was able to use down the road as a preacher and church ruler. And it's one of those things that I bet you at the beginning of his life, he wouldn't have said, I hope I get arrested someday for something that I didn't do. And I'm guessing while he was in the midst of being arrested for something he didn't do, he wasn't thinking, that's kind of cool. I'm glad. And he probably wasn't thinking, oh, the Lord's going to use this in my life down the road. But as we've been talking about, a lot of times it's after the fact that you come out of that trial that you see, all right, God, I get it now. And sometimes you never get there. But for him, he was able to see the purpose behind that trial in his life. So St. Augustine's carnality was different, and his was he had a mistress, and he was very faithful to her for a long period of time. In fact, he has a son with her, a Deodatus, who, he seems to be invested in him and loved her, and they were somewhat of a family, but then he decides he's going to follow the Christian ways, and it's not okay for him to have a mistress, so what does he do? Does he marry her? He sends her away because she wasn't going to edify him in his position. All right, she was sort of a reminder of his sin. Instead of fixing that, he sends her away and gets betrothed to a 10 to 12-year-old girl that came from a good Christian home. So she would be the pure, bright, wonderful aspect to his married life. She would be the good one to have as a wife.
What I didn't get is, why did he send her away and not just marry her? Because it says like he sent her away as an obstacle to his marriage, and then she was like, she would always be faithful to him and she'd never be with another guy. I was just like, okay, well, why don't you just marry her then?
But that's what we just talked about. She's not the trophy wife. She would be his mistress. I think he feels like he could start over. He
just wanted a blank slate, basically.
Kind of. I think he wanted
Really
I think he
Augustine.
wanted the sin of his past to be in his past and kind of make that that clean break between his old ways and his new ways. At this point, though, you have to realize, one, he has not completely been converted. All right, he hasn't had his garden scene. Take and read. But he's still struggling, and I think pride is an issue for him right now. And he wants pride and prestige and all of the things that could come. He's seeing what's going on in Ambrose's life, and he thinks maybe I could be some great bishop or whatever. So I think she's kind of a black eye in his history, and he wants to discard it. Even though he loved her, I think she loved him. I think it's tremendously hypocritical that he didn't marry her, but I can't go back and judge them. But question number 9. What prevented Augustine from becoming a full-fledged Epicurean? So the Epicureans believed, like, eat, drink, sleep, smart you die, take as much as you want from it.
Augustine believed that there was an afterlife, so you couldn't. And the Epicureans believed that there was an afterlife, so
he felt he was going to have to stand before the Lord for the sins that he commits. And yeah, you know, if your mentality is eat, sleep, drink, for tomorrow you die, and there's nothing after that, who cares what you do on earth? You know, where he was like, I like the idea of, you know, doing whatever I want on earth, but I don't feel like death is the end all, and so I probably shouldn't. I shouldn't commit too many sins that I'm not going to want to, you know, have to stand before the Lord on that account. And it's interesting, even the whole idea of he didn't get baptized till his deathbed because he wanted to be baptized and then pure after that. So he really was caught up in this idea that going to the afterlife, you really had to march on the straight and narrow going into it, which I don't think is how God orchestrated it to be. Now, we can't live like wild heathens the whole time either, and you know, and people do have deathbed conversions, but you know, I think for him he was too stuck on some of the wrong things instead of, you know what, I shouldn't live this wild, sinful life because it's a life focused on selfishness instead of a life focused on God. And again, this is all stuff he's wrestling with before he truly is converted. So he'll work this out along the way. But there definitely were some hiccups to his faith in all of it.
And I think that also at this particular point, he probably had kind of the mentality of like Pascal's wager,
Mm-hmm.
you know, where it's a lot safer to believe in God than to not believe in God. You know, he doesn't want to sin in case there's an afterlife, and he has to answer for it.
Yes.
You know? So.
Yes. All right, so that's kind of chapter 6. Chapter 7, it's still more issues that he's wrestling with. And what he does, we start to see a lot more in book 7, is that he goes back to some of those early philosophical days. All right, and Plato had this idea of seeking this higher learning, this higher knowledge or experience. And so what he starts to do with his theology is take it to the rational level. All right, and there's a reference to Plato's cave in there. And you guys should remember Plato's cave. What is Plato's
Isn't that
cave?
where there's a fire behind you, you're sitting, and there's a fire and there's something there. There's something in front of the fire that's casting
So
shadow
they're in a
the
cave. We got people, we got a fire behind that's casting shadows,
And you just see the shadows.
and believe the shadows are
The,
girls.
The real.
Reality, all right? And so then you're thinking these shadows are reality that are being orchestrated by somebody else. And it isn't until one of them finally comes out and sees the sun and sees true light and sees everything around that's like, oh, this is knowledge. This is when people, you're like, oh, I remember that now. But this is when people get it. And so, you know, he kind of uses God as the sun, you know, and for him, he had been involved in all these things where other people were casting shadows saying that was reality, whether it was the Manichees or, you know, different misbeliefs he had in his early faith. But it wasn't until his knowledge was understanding God, all right, and the rational aspect of God. And this is where he goes back to Plato, you know, the idea of a rational theology, not just a blind faith, because he struggled with blind faith. But taking his faith to that rational level and understanding more of God, that he was able to see true knowledge and not just the orchestrated shadows on the wall. We move into chapter 8, which is finally his conversion chapter. And he's getting to the point of where everything is starting to make sense in his mind, and he's kind of just waiting for that last little kick. And so that's where we get to the point of his conversion in the garden. All right, but question number 17. What was wrong with the prayer he offered in his youth?
Okay, so he was like, okay, I want to give up on my sins, just not yet.
Yeah.
When I'm ready.
Well, it's kind of one of those, like, Lord, forgive me for all the sins I will commit down the road. You know, I mean, that, like, I'm just going to I asked forgiveness. You know, I said, please forgive me. But the gist of it all was, it was insincere. You know, it was kind of thrown out there, but he knew that in his heart he didn't mean it. He didn't understand it. And I think that's one of the things that can be really hard with like the sinner's prayer type things, where people will say the sinner's prayer and then they never really live this godly life. And so you come and you say, did they lose their salvation, or were they really saved to begin with? Did they mean it? And it's hard, I can't answer any of those questions. Only God knows, but I think that I've been involved with camps and stuff where, you've got the major altar calls and they say, oh, we had so many professions of faith, and that's great, but how much of it was just word and how much of it was true confession and repentance and salvation? And again, I can't say anything. I have no idea how God works in the hearts of people, and I believe that we can't lose our salvation. So if you're saved, you're saved. But, it's hard. How do you explain people whose lives are so drastically different from what they should be as a Christian? Matt, were you going to say something?
No.
Okay. All right. So, he's just got these points in his life that he realizes he's totally missed the mark. Is what finally pushes him over the edge and gets him converted, and we referenced it already.
Bible bingo.
Bible
Just open
bingo.
it
All
like
right. Okay. How's that bingo though?
I don't know. That's just.
Is that how you've heard it referenced?
Yeah.
Okay. But it's that he's up there and he's wailing over his, I just can't figure it out. God, what do you want to do with me? He's having this great big moment, and all of a sudden he hears this voice, take it and read. Take it and read. Take it and read. And whether...
creepy when you think about it.
Well,
it isn't just a voice, it's like a child's voice.
Yeah, like they're playing, and who knows what they're supposed to be taking and reading. And some people want to argue back and forth of whether, it was kind of just this mystical voice in his head, or were there really children saying it, and only God knows, and it doesn't really change anything in the
in
end.
his state, it might have just been a voice in his head that he thought was real.
Yeah, well, he definitely was a little emotional at the moment. And so, as Matt called it, Bible bingo, he opens up, he points, and it's Romans 13, and it pretty much says, what?
Sell everything.
Does it?
Give up
Yeah,
everything.
Give up. But it was more of
money.
give up your sinful carnal ways. I feel that I need to give up my mistress, and the ironic thing is he takes another mistress in between the one he sends away before he is supposed to get married. So give up that sinful way, and so doing the whole pointing to that passage. He felt that was his moment of, God, I have cried out to you. You have answered what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to give up my sinful carnal ways and follow you. And so there really is a drastic change in him at that point. And I think it's at this point that pride and power and all of that stuff no longer are his goal. It is, I'm giving up the ways of the world, which would be power and pride and things. And I'm seeking after a life that is full because of you. And my life has meaning because I am seeking your ways and learning more about you. And his gut instinct was to do what right away?
Oh, was it retire from his job?
He does retire. He
Yeah.
wanted to go more extreme than that and retire from the world. I mean, he wanted to go live in the wilderness and just be in his
Did he?
cloister of...
Yes,
What?
I don't remember him being that radical, oh, I'm gonna go be a hermit. I don't remember.
Well, that's what some of his friends were doing. I mean, that was
Yeah,
kind of the
that
talk
was-
of it all. And he thought, that's too drastic. That's too
Yeah.
much too soon. So he decides that he's going to retire from teaching. And he had made a significant name for himself. And we had talked last week that, he was teaching in a respectable circle. He didn't like teaching in Rome because the students were knuckleheads. And so he moved to Milan, where he was going to deal with some more reputable students that would value education and value what he was giving them. So he retired from a pretty prestigious job for him to just learn, and then eventually he progresses, and we don't really read a lot about it, but he progresses to being bishop, and he wrote a lot. Remember, he intended, a lot of the authors we've studied this year didn't write because they wanted all of their material to go out. But St. Augustine wrote a lot. He wrote a lot of small letters, similar to what we read with early Christian fathers. He wrote some bigger, theological treatises on different aspects of the faith. And then obviously his City of God. He wanted to be read by other people because he wanted the Romans to stop blaming the Christians yet again for something that went wrong with their world.